The tent was barely big enough to hold my purse. It sagged on one side like it had been punched in the face, and the zipper looked like it had fought its last battle. Inside, the floor was so thin you could feel every rock and root. A squirrel stared at me from the nearest tree, probably wondering if I was the one who was lost. And as I stood there, blinking at that pitiful excuse for shelter, I heard them laughing. Not just chuckles, I mean full-on belly laughs, the kind that make your eyes water. "Guess Grandma Jessie's roughing it," someone shouted from behind a much larger two-room tent lit up like a hotel lobby. I turned around slowly. All 6 of them were watching me from the picnic table, sipping soda and beer, their eyes twinkling with amusement. Some were cousins I barely knew. Others were just guests of guests. But they all shared that same look, like I was the joke. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the land they were camping on, the land they were mocking me on, it belonged to me. I didn't say a word then. I just smiled and turned back toward my tiny, tilted tent. But oh, if they only knew what was coming. My name is Jane Jessie. I'm an 84-year-old retired doctor. I spent 41 years in medicine, mostly at Johns Hopkins, working double shifts in the ER, stitching up bullet wounds and broken hearts. I've seen life at its worst, and people at their lowest. I may not be fast anymore, and my knees complain every morning, but my mind is still sharp. My hearing is even sharper, which is why I caught every nasty whisper they thought I wouldn't. She should have just stayed home. Who even invites their grandma camping? I bet she's gonna ask to share our tent. I've never liked attention. That's why I didn't tell them. Not yet. See, every summer, the younger generation in our family organizes a big camping weekend. It used to be something I helped plan, back when my husband Richard was alive. But after he passed, they slowly stopped asking me. One year they forgot to invite me at all. This year I invited myself. I paid the campground fee like everyone else, drove my old silver truck up the gravel road and found my name on the check-in list. But instead of a cabin or even a modest pitch, I was assigned the smallest, dustiest corner near the old woodshed. No fire pit. No table. Just weeds and mosquitoes. I asked the check-in kid if there was a mistake. "Sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, barely looking up from his tablet. "That's the only one left." Liar. I looked at the assignment sheet, the one with names scribbled in pencil. Plenty of empty spaces, all mysteriously claimed once I got there. And the people who claimed them, they weren't family. They were friends of family. Strangers. Tag-alongs. But they got the shaded spots by the lake. And I got the gravel pit next to the broken shed. I knew right then, this was intentional. I wish I could tell you I brushed it off, that I pitched my tiny tent with grace and moved on. But the truth is, I cried. Not in front of them. Never in front of them. But once I zipped up that flimsy tent and crawled onto my rolled-up sleeping bag, I let the tears fall. Not because I needed luxury. Lord knows I've slept on hospital benches and war-zone cots. But because it felt like being erased. Like I didn't matter. I heard them laughing into the night. "Careful, or Grandma might curse your marshmallows. She's probably in there knitting a tent extension." They didn't know who I really was. Or what I'd done. Or what I still owned. Here's the part I've never told anyone. Back in 1972, Richard and I bought this entire property, all 140 acres of it. It was dirt cheap back then, just forest and rock. No lake, no trails, no plumbing. We cleared the land ourselves, inch by inch, every summer for a decade. We planted those pine trees near the East Trail. We built the first dock before the county ever marked the lake on a map. When we got older and couldn't manage the upkeep, we leased the land to a private campground company. I kept my name off the website, off the board, even off the paperwork my family would see. Why? Because I didn't want them to treat me differently. I wanted to see them. I wanted to know who they were when they thought I had nothing. And now I saw them clearly. The next morning, I walked to the community area. Pancakes were sizzling on the griddle. Kids were chasing each other around the picnic benches. My niece Kelsey barely nodded at me. Her boyfriend, Brett, looked me up and down like I was a pile of laundry. "Rough night, Grandma?" he asked with a smirk. I didn't answer. Just poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee. That's when I heard them planning the bonfire for that night. A family roast, they called it. Everyone would get a turn being teased. But guess who they voted to go first? Yup, me. "Oh, come on," Brett said, laughing. "She can take a joke." And that's when I decided. Enough. They were about to learn the truth. But not with words. No. I do it my way. I walked quietly to the campground office and asked to speak to the manager. A young woman named Carla greeted me, clearly confused. I smiled. "Hi, Carla. I need the deed number for parcel 2437, and a few changes to tonight's event permit." She frowned. "That parcel belongs to— Wait." She looked up sharply. "You're Jane Jessie?" I nodded. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Jessie. I didn't know you were." "It's all right," I said gently. "Let's just make a few updates." That night, just before sunset, they all gathered at the lake for the bonfire. Brett had a fake microphone in his hand. Kelsey was already tipsy on boxed wine. My great-nephew Jonah had a joke list written on napkins. "All right, everyone," Brett shouted. "Let's start with the woman of the hour. Give it up for Tent Lady." They all laughed. I stepped forward slowly, holding a yellow folder in my hand. "Before you begin," I said calmly, "I'd like to say something." Brett rolled his eyes. "Sure. Grandma. Want to tell us how cold it got in that toy tent?" I held up the folder. "This is the original deed to this land," I said. "Bought in 1972 by me and Richard Jessie. I still own it. Every tree, every trail, every campsite." The laughter stopped. "I gave permission for the campground company to run this place," I continued. "But I never gave anyone permission to treat me like garbage." Their faces turned pale. "And tonight," I added, "I've made a few changes to the reservation list. Everyone here will be sleeping a bit differently." I opened the folder and handed it to Carla, who had just walked up beside me. She began calling out names and reassigning tent plots. And then I turned to Brett. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, stepping closer. "You and your marshmallow jokes?" I stopped right in front of him, raised my eyebrow, and whispered, "Your tent's the one by the broken shed now." You should have seen Brett's face. His smile fell so fast, it looked like gravity finally caught up with his ego. 1 second he was the self-proclaimed king of camp, waving around his plastic mic like a stand-up comedian. The next, he was stammering in front of the entire group while everyone's eyes turned on him. "No, wait, this is a joke, right?" He laughed nervously, looking around. Nobody answered. Carla, the campground manager, was now handing out newly printed assignment slips. She was professional about it, but I could tell she was enjoying herself just a little. "Brett and Kelsey," she said, flipping to the top of the stack, "you're moving to Site 23B. That's the gravel corner by the old woodshed. But there's no power hookup there." Kelsey protested. "And the ground's uneven," Brett added. "It's all rocks." I sipped from my thermos. "Yeah, I noticed." A few of the younger campers, who had laughed along with Brett earlier, now had the decency to look embarrassed. One or two even gave me a quiet thumbs up behind their cups. The bonfire still crackled, but the energy had shifted. Completely. After I made my announcement, I didn't say much else. I just walked slowly back to the picnic table near my new real campsite, the one I should have had in the first place. Carla had reassigned me to the lakeside lot under the tall pine trees, with a private fire ring, padded ground, and a view of the water that caught every last drop of the sunset. I sat down on the bench, feeling the evening breeze on my face. Funny how silence can feel like applause when it's deserved. But I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to remind them, and maybe remind myself, of who I really was. Because the truth is, 4 years after Richard died, I let myself shrink. I stopped correcting people when they called me just a grandma. I stopped showing up at family reunions when the jokes started sounding more like jabs. I thought maybe it was better to fade than to fight for space in a world that had moved on without me. But standing in front of that bonfire, watching their smug expressions melt into disbelief, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Later that night, I sat by the lake, staring at the moon's reflection, when I heard soft footsteps approaching. I didn't turn around. I already knew who it was. Kelsey. She cleared her throat awkwardly behind me. Hey, Grandma. I waited. I didn't know about the land, she said. No one did. We didn't mean to. Well, I mean, maybe we were kinda rude. That was putting it lightly. But I let her talk. I guess I just thought, you didn't care about these things anymore. You never came around. You were always quiet. I still didn't know you still mattered. That last word stung more than she probably meant it to. Still mattered. She sat down beside me slowly, folding her arms. Her mascara was smudged. I could tell she'd cried after the bonfire. I'm sorry we stuck you with that tent. I finally looked at her. Did you do it on purpose? She bit her lip. I didn't stop it. That was honest, at least. I guess, she whispered. I didn't want you to outshine everything. I raised an eyebrow. Outshine? You were always this legend growing up. Dr. Jessie. The woman who saved 100 lives and still made pot roast from scratch. I thought if you came back and took up space again, there wouldn't be any left for me. I blinked. That's when I realized something important. Sometimes people mock what they're afraid of. Not because they hate you, but because they feel invisible next to you. I rested my hand over hers. You never had to compete with me, I said gently. I always wanted you to shine. Her eyes welled up. The next morning, word had spread. Not just about the deed, but about who I really was. Turns out, a few of the younger campers had looked me up on their phones. Did you really do heart surgery in a hurricane? One kid asked me. No, I said, smiling. It was in a blackout, and it was only a partial bypass. But yes, I saved his life. Suddenly, everyone wanted to sit near me during breakfast. A teenage girl asked if I could show her how to make my oatmeal pancakes. A young couple said they'd love to hear more about the pine trees we planted. Even Brett, believe it or not, came by and offered to carry my firewood. I accepted, but not before teasing him. Don't trip on the gravel, I said sweetly. His face turned red. The highlight of that day came when I saw a change in the itinerary posted on the community board. Evening bonfire talks, featuring Dr. Jane Jessie. They wanted to hear my story. Not jokes. Not roasts. But the truth. That evening, I sat in a proper chair this time, wrapped in my thick knitted blanket. The fire crackled beside me as the family, and even strangers, gathered around. I told them about the early days. About how Richard and I bought the land for $800 and 2 goats. About how we nearly froze to death one winter when the heater failed, but we cuddled so close it didn't matter. I talked about being the only woman in her residency class. About holding the hands of dying soldiers in field hospitals. About building this place, board by board, dream by dream. And as I spoke, I noticed something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. Not the forced kind you get from age, but the earned kind. The kind that comes from surviving life storms and still showing up. Then came the moment that shook me to my core. One of the little boys, maybe 7 or 8, raised his hand shyly. "Miss Grandma, Doctor Lady?" The crowd chuckled. "Yes, sweetheart." He looked down. "Can I be like you when I grow up?" I couldn't answer right away. My throat tightened. But I finally managed to say, "Yes, you can. And better." Just when the night was wrapping up, Carla jogged over with a strange look on her face. Dr. Jessie, you might want to come see this." I stood up slowly and followed her back toward the main entrance of the campground. That's when I saw them. 3 men in suits standing beside a black car. One of them was holding a manila envelope. The others had clipboards. "I'm Agent Rourke," the tallest one said. "We're from the Department of Land Management." Carla looked panicked. "Is something wrong with the property?" He looked directly at me. "We have reason to believe this land is sitting on top of something valuable." I raised my eyebrows. "Like what?" I asked. He opened the envelope and pulled out a map. Then he pointed to a marked section, right beneath the lake. "Ma'am, we believe there may be an unregistered vein of rare earth minerals running underneath your property." The crowd behind me had followed quietly. Now they gasped. I stared at the map. And that's when I realized. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had no idea what this land really held. I stood there, still holding the blanket around my shoulders, staring at the map Agent Rourke had just handed me. Rare earth minerals? On my land. To be honest, I wasn't even sure what that meant. But judging by the way the other agents stood behind him, tight-lipped, alert, clipboards in hand, it was something serious. Agent Rourke leaned in a little closer. "Ma'am, this could be significant. If the geological survey checks out, this property might be sitting on a multi-million-dollar reserve." My first thought? Richard would have laughed until his ribs hurt. We'd always joked about the land being rich in bugs, rich in mud, and rich in blisters. We never imagined it could actually be valuable beyond our sweat and memories. I looked back at the lake. Behind me, the family crowd had gone silent. Kelsey had stopped mid-sip of her cider. Brett, wide-eyed, looked like he'd swallowed a bug. Even the kids were frozen, clutching half-roasted marshmallows. "Mrs. Jessie," Agent Rourke said again, "do we have your permission to begin preliminary scanning near the waterline?" I blinked. "You want to start tonight?" He smiled gently. "We'd prefer it, yes. If the readings confirm our suspicions, we'll need to file a federal claim. But don't worry, you still hold the deed. You're in control." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead." And just like that, the land they mocked me for, the land they shoved me to the corner of, was now possibly worth more than anything they'd ever touched in their lives. That night, the campground wasn't quiet. 2 survey drones buzzed across the lake like giant mosquitoes. A temporary base station had been set up near the ranger shed. They brought in portable lights, which glowed eerily across the trees. The agents scanned, measured, took soil samples, and fed data into blinking laptops. I didn't sleep much. I sat at my new lakeside spot, sipping hot chocolate and watching the techs work like honeybees. The stars above blinked down, as if they were in on the joke. The tent they gave me might have been small, but the story I was sitting on? It just got enormous. By morning, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Brett came to my site at 6:15 a.m. with coffee and a nervous smile. "Good morning, Dr. Jessie. Did you sleep okay?" "Like a baby in a gold mine," I said dryly. He chuckled too fast. "Yeah, I was wondering if you needed help with anything today?" That was the 3rd time he'd come by in 12 hours. Suddenly, I was the most interesting woman at the campground. At breakfast, people stopped whispering about me and started whispering to me. Kelsey sat beside me, chewing her lip. Grandma, what happens if it really is worth millions? I stirred my oatmeal slowly. Then it changes everything, I said. Or nothing. Depends on the people. What do you want to do with it? She asked, her voice small. I looked around the table, the fire pit, the dock, the pine trees we planted 40 years ago. I want to protect it. That's when Kelsey leaned in. I want to help. A few hours later, Carla asked me if I'd consider giving a talk to the whole campground, not just our family. Word had gotten out beyond our group, and other campers wanted to hear the legend of the doctor landowner. I nearly said no, but something told me it was time. That afternoon, I stood on the wooden platform they used for yoga classes and talent shows. A portable mic was clipped to my collar. The crowd sat on blankets and folding chairs. I didn't speak like a millionaire. I spoke like a woman who had loved, lost, and learned to matter again. I came here this weekend expecting to be ignored. I began. I brought my own tent, my own food, and my own silence. But I was reminded of something. Silence doesn't protect you. It hides you. And sometimes, you have to step back in order to show people who you really are. I told them about Richard, about buying the land, about nearly giving up on family, and then finding my way back, one insult at a time. By the end of it, people stood and clapped. Not for the minerals, not for the deed, but for the woman in the purple windbreaker with gray hair and stiff knees. Me. That night, the agents returned with results. Agent Rourke knocked gently on the frame of my campsite. We confirmed it, he said. A rare vein of bastnasite. That's a rare earth element used in clean energy tech. Wind turbines, hybrid cars, satellites. He handed me a small folder. These readings are preliminary, but conservative estimates put the value at over $16 million. I nearly dropped my mug. He grinned. And since you're the sole landowner, that value is yours, minus mining rights if you choose to lease it. I stared at the number. $16 million. I was an old woman in a borrowed chair, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like lavender. And now, I was possibly the richest person in this whole zip code. Of course, things changed fast after that. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my number. One left me a voicemail saying, "Hey Auntie Jane, just heard the amazing news. Hope to catch up sometime soon. Also, any chance you're hiring a land manager?" Even Brett, who once joked about me sleeping in a doghouse, showed up at dinner with a pie. "I made it myself," he said, grinning sheepishly. I took one look at it. Store-bought, labeled upside down. But I accepted it anyway. "Thank you, Brett. I'll treasure it." The most unexpected part? The campground company called the next morning. The CEO himself. He apologized for the way the staff inadvertently mistreated me during registration. Then he offered to name a section of the property after me, Jesse Pines. Said it would attract visitors. I said I'd think about it. But in truth, I already had my own plans. I wasn't going to let money change everything. I wasn't selling the land. I was going to build on it. Not condos or resorts. Something else. Something of mine. But just when I thought the surprises were done for the weekend, Carla rushed to my tent with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was white. "Dr. Jesse, you need to see this." I unfolded the paper. It was an official-looking document. Legal jargon. A stamped notice. Intent to claim. Family property transfer. Executed without next-of-kin disclosure. Filed by my own nephew. He was trying to take the land from me, saying I wasn't mentally fit, that I hid the property, that he had the right to claim it due to family inheritance loopholes. I read the name again. Michael. Richard's sister's boy. A lawyer with a grudge, who hadn't spoken to me since the funeral. The deadline to respond? 2 days. I looked up at Carla. Can they do this? She shook her head. Only if you don't fight back. I closed the folder. Well, I said, then I guess it's time I fight. It's a strange thing, how quickly a quiet weekend turns into a war. That piece of paper in my hand? It wasn't just ink and legal threats. It was betrayal with a signature. Filed by my nephew Michael, someone I'd rocked to sleep as a baby, someone who used to draw me crooked hearts on napkins at Thanksgiving. Now he was trying to declare me mentally unfit to manage the land Richard and I built from scratch. Just 2 days to respond. 48 hours to prove I wasn't some confused old lady who'd lost her marbles beside the lake. I folded the document neatly and tucked it into my coat. You all right? Carla asked gently. I nodded. Oh yes. But now I need a printer and a war plan. First thing I did was call my lawyer. His name is Hank Durham, an old friend from med school days who switched to estate law after a back injury cut his surgical career short. Gruff voice. Still types with 2 fingers. Jane, he grunted over the phone, they think you're what, senile? They're claiming I hid the property and might not be in my right mind, I said calmly. Long pause. Didn't you write a published paper on decision-making in geriatric trauma? I did. And you're the sole deed holder, correct? Since 1972. He snorted. Then this case is as dead as disco. Fax me that paper and sit tight. I'll file a countersuit and request a cease and desist by morning. I smiled. Thank you, Hank. Oh, and tell your nephew if he wants to see you crazy, I'll pay by the hour. While Hank worked on the legal defense, I turned my attention to the emotional one. Because facts might win in court, but truth wins in people's hearts. And I needed the family behind me, not just staring at my campfire like tourists. So I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called a family meeting. I stood up in front of everyone, the same wooden yoga deck from before, but this time there was no fire, no blanket. Just me in my thick-soled sneakers and old fleece jacket, holding the notice up high. This, I said, is a lawsuit filed by someone I once bounced on my knee. Gasps rippled across the campers. I explained what Michael was trying to do. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. He says I'm too old, that I've lost touch, that this land should belong to someone younger. I scanned their faces. Brett, Kelsey, Carla, even the kids who barely remembered my name. Maybe I am old. Maybe I forget things sometimes. But I remember this land better than anyone. I remember every storm that knocked down those trees. Every summer we couldn't afford a new dock, so we used rope and barrels instead. I paused. And I remember who showed up to help, and who didn't. Silence. But if any of you think I should hand this over quietly, say so now. I won't stop you. No one moved. Then Kelsey stood. I don't want the land, Grandma. I want you. And that broke me. After the meeting, Carla approached me with an idea. We've got the whole campground's attention, she said. Why not make it count? She suggested we host a community day, a kind of living history of the land. I'd lead nature walks, show them the trees Richard planted, teach the kids how to build old-school birdhouses, tell stories around the fire. Let them fall in love with the place, she said. If people care about something, they'll fight to protect it. She was right. So that's what we did. Saturday became Jesse Heritage Day. We strung up lanterns and printed handouts. Brett built a sign with leftover plywood, "Welcome to Jesse Pines." At 9 a.m., I took a group of kids to the East Trail and showed them how we used to trap rainwater using banana leaves and homemade filters. At noon, I cooked stew over the fire while telling them about the raccoon that once stole our entire cooler. By afternoon, even strangers were calling me Doc Jane. Local press showed up too. A young woman named Erin from Channel 9 News asked to interview me. "I heard you used to do heart surgery by lantern light," she said. I laughed. "Not quite. But I once removed shrapnel with a flashlight and a prayer." She turned to the camera. "And now the land you saved on is being threatened?" "That's right," I said. "By someone who believes paperwork matters more than memory." By the end of the day, something had changed in the air. People weren't just camping anymore. They were protecting. Campers volunteered to write testimonials for the defense. One elderly veteran offered to speak in court on my behalf. Even the rangers said they'd support any motion I filed to prevent the land from being transferred. That night, I received an email from Hank. Subject: Urgent. Jane. Good news. Cease and desist filed and served. They can't proceed without a full mental evaluation. And guess what? They'll have to do it on your terms. Bad news. Michael's just filed for an emergency injunction. Claims you've already started selling parts of the land for development. We have 12 hours to respond or they can freeze your deed. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I walked down to the dock Richard built and sat there until the sun rose over the lake. 12 hours. That's all I had to stop someone from seizing my legacy through lies. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and started writing. A letter. To the judge. To Michael. To the entire campground community. And maybe to myself. Here's what it said. I am not afraid of age. I am not afraid of silence or doubt, or even being underestimated. But I am afraid of a world where memories mean nothing, where people think land is just dirt, and legacy is just paperwork. This place is my heart, and if they want to take it, they're going to have to go through every pine tree, every fence post, every stone I ever placed by hand. They'll have to go through me. Sincerely, Dr. Jane Jessie. I hit print. Carla drove me to the courthouse in her Subaru. And as we stepped into that cold marble building, one thought echoed louder than the rest. They gave me the tiniest tent. Now I'm standing taller than any of them ever expected. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. As Carla and I walked in, my heart thudded beneath my coat like a war drum. I wasn't nervous because I feared losing the land. No. I was nervous because this time, I wasn't fighting for just soil and trees. I was fighting for dignity. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. Just a few pew-style benches, a tired-looking judge, and Michael, my nephew, sitting smugly in a navy blue suit, flanked by two lawyers who looked fresh out of law school. He didn't see me right away. But when he did, his mouth twitched. I saw it. That little flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected me to show up in person. He probably thought I'd be too frail or frightened to step foot into a courtroom. He probably imagined I'd send a faxed statement from a recliner somewhere, defeated and mumbling. He was wrong. Court is now in session, the clerk called. The judge, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and stern eyes, adjusted her glasses. This hearing will determine whether a temporary injunction will be placed on parcel 2437, known informally as Jesse Pines, based on a claim filed by Mr. Michael Carter. She turned to me. Dr. Jesse, do you have representation? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. My attorney is en route, but I've brought my response letter and evidence packet. Proceed. I stepped forward and handed the folder to the bailiff. Michael's lawyers rose. Your Honor, we believe Dr. Jessie may be suffering from cognitive decline. Her recent behavior has been erratic. She's distributing permits, making public claims. On her own land, I interrupted, politely but firmly. "Ma'am, please let them speak," the judge said. I nodded. Of course. One of Michael's attorneys continued. Dr. Jessie did not disclose ownership of the land in any known family trust. Her late husband's will left many assets unclear, and we believe there is reasonable doubt that she understands the legal or financial implications of her actions regarding the property. He turned slightly. We've also submitted an affidavit from Mr. Carter's mother, Dr. Jessie's sister-in-law, claiming that Dr. Jessie has refused family mediation and might be acting out of paranoia. That stung. I looked at Michael. He couldn't even meet my eyes. Then the judge turned back to me. Dr. Jessie, would you like to respond? Yes, Your Honor. I would. I took a deep breath. I may be 84 years old, but I am not confused. I am not fragile. And I am not a fool. The courtroom hushed. I bought that land with my husband in 1972. We paid cash. We built the first structures by hand. For 50 years, I paid taxes on it, maintained it, and eventually leased it, quietly, to a campground company. I pulled a copy of the deed from my file and held it up. This is the original deed. My name is on it. Not my husband's. Mine. The judge nodded. Let the record reflect, deed entered into evidence. Now, I continued, the only reason my nephew even knew about this property was because I hosted a family camping weekend. One in which he did not help plan, did not help pay for, and did not even respect. And when he found out it was worth something, only then, did he suddenly decide I was too old to make my own decisions. I turned fully toward Michael. You weren't worried when I was sleeping in a ripped tent by the shed. You were only worried once you realized I wasn't just some old woman in the dirt. I was the owner. He finally met my gaze. But he didn't say a word. The judge spoke again. I see no medical record or formal psychiatric evaluation suggesting cognitive impairment. Furthermore, the land deed appears valid, and no documentation contradicts Dr. Jessie's claim of sole ownership. She looked directly at Michael. Mr. Carter, this appears less like concern for your aunt's well-being and more like opportunism. Michael's lawyers jumped in. Your Honor, with respect. But she raised her hand. Enough. Injunction request denied. Gavel down. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. After court, Michael rushed out, refusing to even glance at me. But Carla and we celebrated with root beer floats at a diner down the street. I told her how Richard used to joke that he wanted to be buried under the pine trees just so he could haunt trespassers. We laughed harder than we had all weekend. But I knew the fight wasn't fully over. Michael was a lawyer. That meant appeals, technicalities, paperwork. He'd try again. So I had to get ahead. Back at camp, I sat down with Hank on a video call. Hank, I said, I want to make this airtight. No more surprises. If I don't wake up tomorrow, I want to know if the land stays exactly where it belongs. He nodded. We'll draft an irrevocable trust. You pick the successor, you dictate the terms. I paused. And for the first time in years, I said a name I hadn't fully believed I would trust again. Kelsey. He raised a brow. You sure? She's grown, I said. And she didn't ask for a dime. She asked for me. Over the next 24 hours, I made decisions faster than I had in decades. I transferred Jessie Pines into a protected trust. Set aside 30% of any future profits for environmental conservation. Created a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth pursuing medical school, in Richard's name. And I wrote a letter to Michael. It was only 6 lines long. Michael, I forgive you. But I won't forget you. This land raised better men. I hope someday you become one. Aunt Jane. I never mailed it. But I think I needed to write it anyway. Sunday morning, the final day of the campout, I stepped back onto the platform one last time. The same people who once laughed at my tiny tent were now waiting to hear what I had to say. So I gave it to them. All my life, I said, I've been underestimated. As a woman, as a doctor, as a widow, as a grandmother, and most recently, as a landowner. But here's the thing about roots. The deeper they go, the harder they are to move. I smiled at the sea of faces. Next year, Jesse Pines will reopen, not just as a campground, but as a legacy site. Educational trails, youth programs, history tours. Not for money, for meaning. They clapped. Some cried. And as the applause rolled over the lake, I felt Richard's hand on my shoulder, not physically, but in memory. Warm, proud, steady. Then, just as I stepped off the platform, a ranger jogged toward me, winded. "Dr. Jesse, there's someone at the gate asking for you." I followed him, curious. There, standing outside the fence, was a man in a pressed suit, holding a large leather briefcase. "Dr. Jesse?" he asked. "Yes." He opened the case and pulled out a thick packet. "My name is Victor Lang. I represent a green energy consortium. We saw your mineral scan results. We'd like to discuss a partnership." I blinked. "A what?" "A lease. A non-invasive, sustainable extraction agreement. You'd retain all land rights, but the royalties could exceed $50 million. $50 million. I gripped the fence post beside me, and as the wind stirred the pine trees, one thought hit me like a bolt from the sky. They gave me a tiny tent, and now they want to give me a kingdom. $50 million. I must have stood there staring at that man for a full minute before I finally said, "Sir, I'm just a grandma in a fleece jacket. You're talking to me like I'm an oil baron." Victor Lang smiled politely. "With respect, Dr. Jesse, that fleece jacket might be covering one of the most valuable mineral veins in the state." The words didn't feel real. 50 million wasn't just wealth. It was transformational. The kind of number that changed not just one life, but generations. But here's the thing. I wasn't tempted by the money. I was afraid of it. Because I'd spent my entire life building things slowly, one patient, one pine tree, one piece of trust at a time. And money had a way of speeding things up until they spiraled out of control. So I didn't answer him right away. "I need time," I said. "I'm not making any decisions today." Victor nodded. "Understood. But we do hope to begin talks soon. Our window for partnership is limited. I'll leave my card." He handed it to me, bowed his head slightly, and walked back toward the gleaming SUV parked at the gate. That night, I barely slept. I sat in the rocking chair outside my new campsite, the card still in my hand. Kelsey brought me hot tea and sat beside me for a while. "Are you gonna take the deal?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I said. "Your grandpa and I always wanted this land to be a place of healing. Peace. But $50 million, that's enough to build schools, hospitals, homes." She nodded slowly. "I think he'd want you to dream big," she said. "But not alone." That sentence hit me square in the chest. Not alone. Because for so long after Richard passed, I had done everything alone. By choice. By pride. By fear of becoming a burden. But here was this granddaughter who had once laughed behind my back, now becoming my closest confidant. The next morning, something strange happened. A drone flew overhead, not from the government or the survey team. This one had a little camera strapped to it, buzzing over the trees. A few hours later, I found out why. Michael. He'd hired a real estate videographer to capture aerial footage of the land, probably trying to frame it for a commercial development pitch. I knew because Brett came to me with the screenshots. Someone leaked it, he said. It's already online. He's pitching Jesse Pines as prime resort potential. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just stood up and walked straight to Carla. Call a meeting, I said. Everyone. Tonight. That evening, the campground gathered once more around the central fire pit. The lanterns were lit. The wind was soft. And I stood there with Kelsey on one side, Carla on the other, and my cane planted like a stake. I want to tell you a story, I began. But not about me. About this land. I pointed toward the dock. Right there, Richard proposed to me on a Tuesday. I said no the first time. I wanted to finish med school. He waited 2 more years, and then asked again in the rain. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I turned to the trailhead, and down that path, we planted wildflowers during the summer of '81. We had no money for a garden, so we just scattered seeds and hoped for the best. I paused. This place wasn't designed. It grew the way families are supposed to. The fire crackled. But now, someone wants to pave it over, dig it up, sell it off. Gasps and murmurs. I won't let that happen. Then I raised my voice. I am creating a private conservation trust. This land will never be sold. Not for hotels. Not for condos. Not even for all the money in the world. Cheers broke out. Someone shouted, "Long live Jesse Pines." But I wasn't done. One day when I'm gone, I want people to walk these trails and say, this was kept, not bought, not taken, but kept. The crowd stood and applauded. And for the first time all weekend, I didn't feel like the old woman in the corner. I felt like a matriarch, a guardian. But fate wasn't quite done with its surprises. Because the next morning, Michael returned. Not with lawyers. Not with suits or drones or papers, but alone. And crying. I was walking by the dock, carrying a basket of folded blankets, when I saw him standing there. He turned as I approached. "Aunt Jane," he said, eyes red. I messed up. I stayed silent. I got greedy. I thought maybe if I got a piece of it, people would respect me more. I've always been average. I've always been invisible. That word again. Invisible. I softened just a little. Then why didn't you just ask me for help? He shrugged. Because pride makes people stupid. He sat down on the bench. I lost my job last year. Didn't want the family to know. Then I saw the news about the minerals, the value, and I snapped. I tried to take the shortcut. I sat beside him, slowly. Michael, shortcuts don't make legacies. They make regrets. He nodded. I know. I really do. Then he pulled a letter from his coat. I came to give you this. I'm withdrawing the claim. And I'm sorry. I took it, eyes stinging. I don't forgive you yet, I said. But this is a start. Later that day, Kelsey and I walked the trail one last time before the campers packed up. She held my hand like she did when she was 5. You know, she said, you never told me what you're going to do with the 50 million. I smiled. Maybe I'll build the world's quietest hospital. Or maybe I'll just plant 50 million pine trees. She grinned. And maybe you'll finally get a bigger tent? I laughed. Never. That tiny tent taught me more about people than a mansion ever could. And just as we reached the bend in the trail, I saw something that stopped me cold. A small wooden plaque, nailed gently into one of the oldest trees near the dock. Carved into it, in fresh handwriting, were the words, Jesse Pines, where legacy lives. And beneath it, in smaller letters, We remember. We protect. We belong. I didn't put it there. Neither did Carla. I have no idea who did it, but I smiled through the tears anyway. Summer faded into fall. The pine needles turned dark and rich, the air cooler, sharper, the kind that clears your mind before your lungs. Most of the campers had gone home. The laughter had died down. The lanterns had been packed away. But I stayed. Just me and the land. Me and Jesse Pines. It was mine, yes, legally, historically, emotionally. But now it felt like I belonged to it. Like every tree knew my heartbeat. Every gust of wind carried my name. In the mornings, I walked the lake trail. In the afternoons, I met with architects and planners, not for resorts or cabins, but for legacy projects. Quiet classrooms in the woods. A nature therapy clinic for veterans. An outdoor observatory for rural school kids who had never seen the stars without streetlights. At night, I sat by the dock and thought about Richard. About how we never imagined our patch of dirt would one day become a battleground, a stage, and a sanctuary, all at once. And then the letter came. It arrived in a plain envelope with a government seal. I almost ignored it, thinking it was tax paperwork or park permits. But when I opened it, my hands began to shake. It was from the National Heritage Commission. They were officially nominating Jesse Pines as a protected landmark, a historic, privately conserved ecological and cultural site. If approved, it would be placed on the National Registry. It would live long after I was gone. And in that moment I wept. Not because of money, not because of victory, but because of the meaning. Because the little girl I used to be, the one who slept under tables and built tree houses from scrap wood, she had finally come home. A few days later, I hosted one last gathering. It was smaller, quieter. No stage, no speeches, just picnic blankets and campfire stew. Kids ran barefoot. Grown-ups sat with thermoses and tears. Kelsey stood beside me, holding a tiny paper lantern she made by hand. It had Richard's name on it. We lit dozens of them, one by one, and set them gently afloat on the lake. Each one carried a memory, a hope, a name. I looked around and realized no one was laughing at me anymore. Not because they feared me, but because they saw me. Truly, fully, finally. As the last lantern floated into the darkness, Brett tapped my shoulder. "Dr. Jesse," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" I raised an eyebrow. "As long as it doesn't involve marshmallows." He grinned sheepishly. Would you ever consider letting me volunteer here? I'm good with tools. And I want to teach my son about what matters." My breath caught in my throat. "That's the best offer I've had in years," I said. And just like that, the loudest boy at the bonfire had become a student of stillness. Before everyone left that evening, I handed out envelopes. Inside each one was a wooden token, about the size of a silver dollar, carved with a single phrase. "You belong here." No logos, no sponsors, no expiration dates. Just a reminder that Jesse Pines was no longer just my legacy. It was ours. Winter came fast that year. But I didn't feel cold. Because in the quiet, I heard every voice that once doubted me, and every heart that now stood beside me. Because in the stillness, I felt Richard's hand again, just as warm as it ever was. Because in the silence, I finally heard myself, not as a widow, or a patient, or a forgotten grandma in a tiny tent, but as a woman who reclaimed her place in the world with grace, grit, and a glimmer of fire. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the lake, I hear laughter again. Not mocking, not cruel, but joyful. The sound of family rediscovered. The sound of legacy rooted deep. The sound of a tiny tent that started it all.